Thanks for joining today's webinar. Security is obviously important to all of us, and JobReady Live plays an important part in your businesses. So we wanted to take you through what we consider how best to use JobReady Live and to configure JobReady Live in I suppose the most safe and securest way you can. We've done a lot of developments over the last few months to enhance the security posture of JobReady Live, and we just wanted to share that with you. A bit of general housekeeping. So webinar today will probably be around the 20-minute mark. Got plenty of time for questions, so do feel free to ask any questions along the way. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, so you're welcome to post any questions you have in there. We'll do our best to answer those questions as we go, but if in the event we can't answer them, we'll be issuing a Q&A after this session. And we'll also be preparing a best practice security guide off the back of this webinar as well, just to outline the things that we've gone through and giving you a bit more of a step-by-step as to how to enable these various functions in your instance of JobReady Live and how you can use them. So yeah, that'll be sent to you following today's webinar. And we are also recording the webinar, and we'll share a link of this recording as well, so that you can share amongst your teams if you need to. So today you're joined by myself, Chris McMillan, and Raymond Tran. I'll be taking you through most of today, and Raymond will be hopping out with some of the Q&A. So we're going to be covering about 6 points and some Q&A today. So the first of all, I'll just take you briefly and recap JobReady Live's accreditation. We'll go through the shared responsibility model that JobReady operates under in partnership with providers. We'll go through how you can enhance your organisation's security posture with JobReady Live, and how you can enable some of those features that we've developed recently. We'll recap on some access management and some best practice there. We'll cover how you can audit usage of JobReady Live in the event you need to. And then we'll cover off just a couple of points on how best to communicate with us, particularly from a support perspective, and how not to, and I suppose things that you shouldn't do. So to kick us off, JobReady Live is accredited, an accredited third-party employment system. That full accreditation was granted back in, I think, February by the Department of Education, Skills and Employment. JobReady and ReadyTech as a whole also have ISO 27001 certification as well, which covers our entire business. If you ever need to see the accreditation details of JobReady Live, that's available on the department's Digital Information Assurance website. We'll be posting a link to that website as well with the documents we send out, and that's just there so that you can see the certification that JobReady has. As I mentioned in the agenda, JobReady Live operates under a shared responsibility model, so we can clearly outline where our responsibilities are and where your responsibilities as the customer are. In a nutshell, and we do get into this a little bit more shortly, we're responsible for the security of the application, which means the hosting environment, how the application is developed and supported and so forth. And then you're responsible for the security in the application, which is you decide who can have access to JobReady Live and what kind of access they have. So that's how we really draw the line as to where our responsibilities start and end, and where yours do as well. So a few things that have been done over the last few months that can assist you in enhancing your security posture. So we activated single sign-on to JobReady Live. For those of you who aren't familiar, single sign-on will allow your staff to use your, more than likely your Microsoft 365 setup, so your internal network setup, and their credentials to your internal network to gain access to JobReady Live. What that means is that they then only have one set of credentials, and those are the credentials that you grant them to your internal network, and they can use those to access JobReady Live. What that also means is if you've applied additional security measures to that, such as MFA or multi-factor authentication, it means that those will inherently flow down into JobReady Live. So for those who aren't familiar on what MFA or multi-factor authentication is, often it's very, very common these days that when you log into a service, maybe you haven't used it for some time, or you're using it from a new computer, you'll be sent either an SMS code to put in, or you might have an authentication app on your mobile device and asked to put in usually that 6-digit code. So that multi-factor authentication really enhances your security posture. And it gives you a bit more assurance that if someone does obtain your password or one of your team's password, there is that second factor of authentication as a backup, so they can't gain access just via password itself. The other item we've introduced is the ability to restrict where your staff can access JobReady Live from. So that's called IP restricting. Some of you may operate internal virtual private networks, for example, and you only want your staff to have access to the application from within your office network. And we can actually assist you in applying that IP restriction so they can only access within that network. So that just further enhances the security. So it means you have greater control over where your users can be accessing the system from. And virus scanning, less so much an option. It's just built into JobReady Live. So all documents that are uploaded into JobReady Live are virus scanned. And if there are any issues with those documents, they'll be outlined. You will have seen in recent release notes how to identify whether a file has been scanned for a virus or not as well. What I'm going to do is just flick over to JobReady Live now and just show you how single sign-on can be enabled. We do also have an activation guide for single sign-on. It's a very simple process, but you would need your IT team to help out with that. But yeah, I'll just flick over to JobReady Live and show you how that's done. So for those administrative users who have access into the settings component of JobReady Live, we have our SAML single sign-on option on the left-hand side here. And there's a file that can be produced from your internal network authentication system that is then uploaded into JobReady Live. It's important to note that users will still need to be set up in JobReady Live, so you can control which of your internal users have access to JobReady Live. However, once they're set up, their password and authentication is then controlled through your internal system. One other option we have over here is to force single sign-on. So there are two options when it comes to single sign-on. It gives users the option to use either their network credentials or their credentials within JobReady Live. Forcing single sign-on will mean that no one can log in without their credentials to your internal network. So it just enhances that security posture as well. The IP restricting is something that we help you enable, just because obviously if that's incorrectly configured, you would effectively lock yourself out. So if you do have interest in using that, just let us know. So on to access management. So as covered before, this is really one of your key responsibilities, and that's really around who you decide can have access to JobReady Live, and also the type of access they have within JobReady Live. So that covers the creating of user accounts, the locking of user accounts when staff may leave your organisation. Now, one of the key benefits with single sign-on is when staff do leave your organisation, you then only have one place that you need to deactivate their account from, and that's via your internal network, which will then take care of their JobReady Live access. So again, another benefit of single sign-on, and I can't recommend it highly enough. You can define the roles and the privileges that users have. Here internally at JobReady, we operate a least necessary privilege model, which means that unless you need access to something, by default, you do not get it until you need it. And yeah, we highly recommend that is adopted by your organisations as well. Just means that you're only granting access to people where they actually have a need for something, rather than the other way around of providing a whole of access and then pairing back from there. If you do operate multiple programs, for example, Job Active, DES, Transition to Work, you can define which of those programs a user may have access to. To take it to a next step, you can also define which sites data a user may have access to if you choose to limit data down to that level. We recommend doing regular user access reviews. It's something that here at JobReady we do on a monthly basis, which is, again, it's really a reconcile process to make sure that the users that do currently have access are those that actually need access, and there's no one that's left the organisation and perhaps your offboarding process may have missed a component. And the second and the last is a log-on banner. So we've introduced a log-on banner, which will pop up when users log into JobReady Live, and that's just a reminder of their obligations, particularly from a security perspective of having access to the system. Again, similar to the IP restrictions, we can assist you in enabling that function. You just need to provide us with the text that you would like shown when they log into JobReady Live, and we can help you configure that. So I'm going to jump over to JobReady Live now, just to go through a couple of these things for you. So if we jump into the user component, obviously the creation of users is entirely within your control. So you can define who has access to the application and the type of access. So when we talk about roles and privileges and least necessary privilege, a couple of things we're referring to here are really around these checkboxes here. So what does the user need to access? And there are a couple of things that really spring to mind as being probably most critical. Probably the key is around exporting of data. Obviously, once data leaves the JobReady Live environment via an export, then that's out of our control. Obviously, the more pieces of data you have on people's computers and so forth, the more, I suppose, exposed you are from a security perspective. So we do recommend limiting the exporting of data, but totally understand that there is also a need for it. But you can define who can and can't export data. And that means on the list screens in JobReady, they don't have the option to click the export button. So a really important one there to give you some greater control and means that the data is kept within JobReady Live. And the rest of these items really relate to individual features. Things like bulk SMSing is always a good one. You can define who can and can't bulk SMS as well, and who can get to certain listing screens. So really worthwhile making sure that users only have access to the things that they need. So these are feature related. The next item I mentioned was around that program level security. So if you only operate one program within JobReady Live, you won't see this section, but if you do have multiple programs, you will then be able to define which program's data a user can access. And primarily we're referring to job seeker data and items that live on a job seeker's record. So if we were to say my organisation had DES and Job Active, but I only had access to Job Active here, it means that I wouldn't be able to see DES job seekers on a listing screen. I wouldn't be able to locate them by filtering or by searching either. So it's a way you can further, I suppose, restrict access to only data that's required. And then secondly, the site level security, which allows you to then say, okay, a particular user can only access data for these particular sites. Each job seeker is attached to a site in ESS, which in turn then downloads into JobReady Live. And this just means that if I only have access to one site, it means that when I go to listings, when I filter, or when I run a search, I can only see records that relate to that particular site. If there are none selected, it will have it will mean you have access to everything. Otherwise, you can then narrow it down from there. Just one other thing I wanted to show you relating to single sign-on. If I just flick over to my next screen here, if you have single sign-on enabled, it will enable this button here underneath your login screen for single sign-on, which means that instead of the user having to enter their username and password, by clicking single sign-on, it will then validate whether that user is currently logged in to your internal network, your internal Microsoft 365 system. If so, it will then check whether that user has an account in JobReady Live and then automatically log them in. So really, it's great from a user perspective and also great from a security perspective. Just jumping back to users, if you need to lock a user, so a user may have left your organization and say you're not using single sign-on, you can click on the three dots and lock user, which means they won't have access to JobReady Live anymore. Okay. Just going to jump back to my presentation now to move on to the next section. Okay, so the next one is around auditing. So if you need to see what a user may have done, and that comes down to what records may they have viewed or searched for, or what data may a user be exporting. So both of those are possible from within JobReady Live. So sorry to jump around, but I will jump back into JobReady Live now. If I find my user account, for example, and I click on the eye to view the details, first of all, you'll see my account activity. So this will show every instance where this particular user has logged in, when they've logged out, and then what records have actually been viewed as well. And you can click through to those to see the records that have been viewed. Where it says index searched, it means that the user's gone to, say, perhaps the job seeker, the all job seeker screen and applied a filter to narrow down a list. So it allows you to have some visibility over what users have been doing in the event that you need to audit their activity. The second thing is around exporting and being able to view what has been exported. So on the left-hand side down the bottom, we have CSV exports. And then you can see all the exports that have been run, dates and times, and who's actually run them. You can then filter those down further if you needed by particular user or users if you're wanting to narrow down on someone. JobReady Live will actually also save a copy of the extract that they ran, and you can actually download that to see the data that was within there as well. You can see from a glance here which screen they were exporting from. So you can see in this instance, the exports were done from the notes screen or the expense screen or the placement screen. So you can actually, at a glance, see what has and hasn't, what has been exported. So that's how you can get a bit more visibility over what's happening within your instance of JobReady Live. Just jump back to my presentation now. So the final piece we wanted to cover is how you should be communicating with us. Always a rule is ensure that whether it's for a support item or whether it's an email directly to one of our team, that there's no personal identifying information within that email. So that means if you're taking screenshots, make sure that any personally identifying information has been deleted out of those screenshots. Or better yet, what you can actually do is email us just the URL of the screen that you're on, and that'll allow us to go to that particular screen again. So really important not to email or send via Zendesk personal identifying information. Use those URLs as a reference. It's always best to lodge, especially if it's support through Zendesk. And if you're using Zendesk via the JobReady Live application, it will then automatically tell us which screen you were on at the time of lodging that Zendesk request. So that information will come to us automatically. So they were the key things we wanted to cover in today's section. I'm just going to check to see if there's any Q&A. First question is around the being able to restrict the bulk SMSing. Yeah, that's a really new feature. So we'll get that enabled for anyone that wants that turned on for them. Next question is around, is there the ability to set default access levels linked within roles? So currently we don't have the security based on particular roles. We allow you to define that on a user by user basis. It is becoming increasingly more common or more requested to have role based, so you can select a role and then it defaults those options. So yeah, great suggestion, and we'll add that to our list. I think that's definitely an item that can be of benefit to everyone. If there's any other questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A. Whilst we're waiting, this is just the first of what's going to be a series of webinars we'll be hosting. This one obviously focused on security, but the other sessions we want to focus on functionality within JobReady Live to give you a refresher training or a bit of more of an overview onto maybe new features that we've been added. So we'll be hosting those more frequently. So keep an eye out for invitations to those sessions. Obviously, we'll always be recording those. So if you can't make it, that's okay. We would really love to hear from you on if there are aspects of the system that you would like to be covered in future webinars. So please do let us know if there are items that you want that you would like covered. We want to make sure that the content we deliver is relevant as what you want to hear. So please do let us know. Otherwise, we'll pick out some of the things that we think are really handy for you to know. Doesn't look like there's any other Q&A coming through. So thank you very much for your time today. As mentioned, we'll distribute a recording and we'll distribute our security best practice guide as well after this session. If you do have any questions that pop into your head afterwards, please do let us know. We'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Otherwise, thanks for your time and have a great afternoon.